Isekai manga are known for being pretty bland and generic, but there are a few exceptions. I did the task of digging through the trenches to find you 10 actually good isekai manga, with the first being Isekai Samurai. This story is about a samurai named Ginko, whose one wish is to perish in battle. She's worried that she will be unable to fill this desire due to her strength and skill, so she prays to Buddha, asking for help. Suddenly, Ginko finds herself in a strange fantasy world filled with monsters and strong opponents. Overall, this manga is pretty fun. Ginko is an interesting character, and the manga goes into depth regarding how her life in our world impacts her reactions in her fantasy world. The art is also very well done, being cutesy stylized while maintaining a gritty aesthetic. The characters are definitely one of the weaker aspects of the story, but as of recording, there are not too many chapters out right now, so hopefully they will get some development in the future. While mostly unknown in the West, this manga is pretty popular in Japan, with the author having over 100,000 Twitter or X followers. It also ranked 17th among the Konomanga ga Sugoi 2024 rankings, which is a pretty solid accomplishment for a manga that hasn't been serializing for too long. Isekai Samurai is a fun isekai manga that is still in its infancy, with a strong aesthetic and protagonist. If you're enjoying the video so far, make sure you subscribe so you could watch more videos just like this one. The Eminence in Shadow is probably the most humorous and popular manga on this list. In his previous life, Sid trained to become the strongest man in the world, with his main goal being able to take on a nuke. After reaching his physical limits, Sid began to try and learn magic, but unfortunately, his quest was cut short by his death. Fortunately for Sid, he was reincarnated from our world into a new fantasy world. In his new life, Sid actively tries to become as powerful as possible, both physically and socially, all while keeping his identity hidden and pretending to be like an average background character, or NPC. He does this by creating a fake, edgy shadow organization that manipulates things from behind the scene. This manga is 8th grade syndrome to the max, but it is done in a self-aware way, parodying common edgy tropes and turning them into jokes. Personally, I feel that this manga is pretty funny, but obviously humor is subjective, so if you aren't a big fan of ironic humor, this manga probably isn't for you. Another criticism of this manga that I have is the art, which is rather inconsistent. Some panels look amazing, while others look a bit more rushed, or like corners have been cut. Despite this, I feel that this manga is a perfect example of how to parody and deconstruct a genre in an entertaining and engaging fashion. Oftentimes, parodies are mean-spirited, or rely solely on targeting recognizable moments from popular pieces of media, but The Eminence in Shadow embraces the tropes, is very lighthearted, and has an engaging story of its own. I know the anime adaptation of the story is super popular, but the manga is ahead of the anime, so if you like the anime, then I'd recommend reading this manga. So I'm a Spider, So What is a monster isekai story, but it sets itself apart from the others in its execution. Oftentimes, monster isekai stories focus on a monster who is special or different from the other monsters, like having unique skills and abilities, but in this manga, that isn't really the case. The protagonist, Kumiko, was reincarnated as a mere spider in a fantasy world, and she has to go to great lengths to level up, let alone survive. Each encounter she has, whether it be with a wasp or a dragon, is very intense, as the enemies are scaled with Kumiko's strength. The conflicts in this manga reflect this, as not every battle is a victory for her. As the story goes on, the tension does get relieved for a bit, but with the latest couple chapters, it's definitely returned. Another positive aspect of this manga is the visuals. The art is a bit above average, but the paneling itself is stellar. With stories following non-human protagonists, the illustrators, or mangakas, often don't change the paneling to adapt to the protagonist. In So I'm a Spider, So What, the illustrator adapts the paneling to fit Kumiko's spider design. It's easily the best reincarnated as a monster isekai, and after reading the light novel, I can guarantee that the rest of this manga is going to be amazing. In The Faraway Paladin, William died after living an unfulfilled life. After his death, he was reincarnated into a fantasy world. He was raised by 3 warriors, with 2 acting as his parents and 1 as his grandfather. Eventually, William becomes old enough to go out and explore the world on his own. The first part of this manga is about the importance of family and letting go, while the second part focuses more on becoming independent and finding your place in the world. William had wasted his first life, and now he's determined to make his new one meaningful, and he does this through helping others. This is a pretty chill isekai about personal growth, and it has a feel-good attitude. I will say that the most recent chapters have been a bit generic feeling, and there's been several major and literal Deus Ex Machina moments, which is pretty unsatisfying. Overall, there isn't too much to say about this manga, as it's pretty much like a generic isekai done very well. In Grimgar, a fantasy and and Ash, Haruhito finds himself in a strange fantasy world. He struggles just to survive, so he joins an adventuring party to make ends meet. Despite this, adventuring is still very difficult, and there's many losses. This is a pretty realistic isekai. If the average NEET was put in a fantasy world, they wouldn't become some insane adventurer overnight. They would need to suffer before reality sets in and they realize they need to grow stronger. And this is depicted in Grimgar of Fantasy and Ash, as every day is a violent struggle for Haruhito and his companions. The story covers themes of loss, acceptance, and personal growth. The character development is pretty neat, and the way that the themes are tackled is intelligent. The art is around average, nothing to really write home about, but overall it's a pretty thought-provoking and realistic isekai that you should check out. The Cat's Paw is for the shoujo enjoyers. This manga is about a college girl who suddenly gets teleported to another world with a cat she's holding. They combine and become a weird cat hybrid. My biggest critique of this manga is probably the character design. She has cat ears, but her hands and feet are like furry and have claws and pads, but they aren't actually paws. They're like hands, and I don't know, man. It's weird. I don't like it. Anyways, the girl, whose name is Cha, is taken in by a wealthy family and acts as their maid. One day, the family's attacked, and Cha runs away, and she's found by a soldier. The soldier sees her hunting abilities, I guess it's part of the cat thing, and makes her part of his squad. The rest of the manga is about Cha trying to fit in and help others. It is a shoujo slice of life isekai, which isn't really my cup of tea, but I do have to say the art is well done, and the story's laid back and pretty fun, for the most part. The manga is only 7 chapters long, so there isn't too much I could say about it without spoiling anything, but I hope this recommendation can satisfy the shoujo enjoyers out there. Reincarnated as the hero's friend sounds like it would be a generic isekai manga. It's about a salaryman who gets reincarnated in a world of his favorite video game, where he befriends the hero and tries to help him defeat the Demon King. While this sounds like every isekai ever, it's actually a super refreshing take on the genre. Instead of adventuring and exploring, the main focus of this story is the protagonist's accomplishments in battle, and how those accomplishments impact his mentality and those around him. What makes this manga stand out is how the protagonist navigates noble society, a society which he detests. Here, he uses his knowledge of the game he played, as well as intuition, to help the hero gather more power, and to keep the hero safe from predatory nobles. In a lot of similar stories, the protagonist will often use their knowledge for their own personal gain, or act like they're better than others because of their exclusive knowledge. But here, the protagonist is very down to earth, and uses his knowledge to keep everyone in the kingdom safe. Another cool thing about this manga is the art, which is reminiscent of older generation manga. It's pretty cool to see these new ideas and concepts mixed with the style, and personally, it's gotta be my guilty pleasure on this list. Finally, we have a manhwa. Id is an old school manhwa, or Korean comic, that opens with the protagonist, Chunhwa, being transported from his high fantasy world to a new high fantasy world. Here, Chunhwa goes on an adventure, making friends, helping others, and taking down bad guys. The art is pretty good, and the story's interesting, and the characters are well developed. It's just a pretty solid, old school fantasy story that I'm sure some of the older viewers would enjoy. Unfortunately, the company that made this, manhwa, went out of business, so the story is likely never to be finished, but it's still a fun and worthwhile read nonetheless. Thank you all for your recent support, especially on the last video. I'm sorry that I haven't uploaded in a long time, but I've been very busy with things in my personal life. Thankfully, I should have a lot more time to work on these videos, and I look forward to reading more manga and making more videos in the future. Thank you all. Later, gamers.